Good morning, everyone. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And this morning is December 1st already, 2018. Before I give it to Mike, I just wanted to thank him for taking up this Bible study today. In Science and Health, in citation 6, Mrs. Eddy says, "Ever since the foundation of the world, ever since era would establish material belief, evil has tried to slay the lamb. But science is able to destroy this lie called evil." The 12th chapter of the Apocalypse typifies the divine method of warfare in science and the glorious result of this warfare. So this is what we're taking up, the 12th chapter in Revelation, and we'll be learning about the spiritual warfare that we all must be prepared to do. We're already in it. So thank you, Mike. Very inspired. Go ahead now.
Thank you, and I guess that's why the printer wouldn't work just now.
Doesn't like it.
So the reading is from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy on page 96. This material world is even now becoming the arena for conflicting forces. On one side, there will be discord and dismay. On the other side, there will be science and peace. Breaking up of material beliefs may seem to be famine and pestilence, want and woe, sin, sickness, and death, which assume new phases until their nothingness appears. These disturbances will continue until the end of error, when all discord will be swallowed up in spiritual truth. Mortal error will vanish in a moral chemicalization. This mental fermentation has begun and will continue until all errors of belief yield to understanding. Belief is changeable, but spiritual understanding is changeless. As this consummation draws nearer, he who has shaped his course in accordance with divine science will endure to the end. As material knowledge diminishes and spiritual understanding increases, real objects will be apprehended mentally instead of materially. During this final conflict, wicked minds will endeavor to find means by which to accomplish more evil, but those who discern Christian science will hold crime in check. They will aid in the ejection of error. They will maintain law and order and cheerfully await the certainty of ultimate perfection.
Thank you, Mike.
Anyone want to comment?
I wanted to thank Mike for not shying away from a long reading. I know I've done that to myself a few times.
Well, it explains the situation and what's going on. And this is what we're to be doing, holding crime in check, aiding in the ejection of error, maintaining law and order, and cheerfully awaiting the certainty of ultimate perfection. We must never lose that joy, because you can get very boggled down and all this stuff. So keep the joy. Remember, it's untrue, not the true picture. It's the Adam dream.
Even though it may be right in your own home,
Yep.
which often is, or in your neighborhood,
I like the idea.
or in some cases in your church, not this necessarily, but in other churches.
And in your
I like the idea of. Go ahead, Mary.
and in your nation, that's all. Right, in our country. Go ahead.
No, it's reassuring, changeable, and changeless. That's what I look at. Evil will change. It can be. It will be destroyed. Truth cannot be changed.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, mean, as we look at the news, as we look around, we see famine and pestilence, right? We see want and woe. We see sin. We see sickness, death. We see all of this stuff. But what does she say it is? It's the breaking up of material beliefs. And it wants you to believe it. It wants you to believe that it's true. It wants you to get upset about it. Because that's all the human mind can do, is to try to persuade you that something that is not true is true. Get you to lose your joy. Get you to believe there's a power other than God. And if it can do that, it's got you. Our job as Christian scientists is not to let that happen. Let the breaking up of material beliefs run their course. However awful it may look, however uncomfortable it may appear to feel, let it run its course. And cheerfully await the certainty of ultimate perfection. This is a discipline, isn't it? This is a warfare. As Eddie refers to becoming a Christian scientist as enlisting in an army. There are many people who are just unwilling to enlist in this army. That's why she says you can always tell when truth first appears by the fewness and faithfulness of its followers. So if you are willing to enlist in this army, you will be part of a few and faithful group that will do wonderful, incredible things for mankind. And why? Because God is doing it through you. Why else are we here? What greater purpose could anybody have? So this Bible study is all about enlisting in this army and getting trained to do battle.
And seeing Mrs. Eddie Wright.
Seeing Mrs. Eddie Wright.
Which is a big part of it.
Which is necessary.
Yeah.
Essential.
Okay, Mike?
Two things. One is that I really appreciate you having read that, Mrs. Singletary, because I almost changed to that for the reading. And then the other thing is that I'm going to be quoting some from a book that Linda shared with me called Distinguishing Characteristics of Mary Baker Eddy's Progressive Revisions of Science and Health. And that goes along with what was just said about error, keeping up with, trying to keep up with truth, because this book is very much about why she made the revisions, was to stay a step ahead of the error that was nipping at her heels and trying to destroy Christian Science. So the truth didn't change, but the way she worded it was for the signs of the times.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, so the topic is Understanding Revelation 12. Bible readings were Revelation 12, 1 through 17, emphasis on 1 through 10, which was in the lesson. And additional readings were Revelation interpreted by Reverend G.A. Kratzer, Revelation of St. John, an open book by Irving Tomlinson. And the first question is, and if anybody is willing to volunteer to read these verses as we go along, that would be great. The question is, what is the meaning of each verse in Revelation 12, beginning with Revelation 12:1? Okay, so the first verse, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars.
So who would like to start?
Well,
So we've begun. So.
I didn't want to be the one that started, but I shall. The wonder in heaven was explained in the Reverend Kratzer's book as John beheld a new level of consciousness that he didn't have before. And the woman with the 12 stars was explained as being 12 tribes of Israel, which actually represent generic man, and also represents the 7 churches at the beginning of Revelation, because those were the modes of thoughts as we had studied it earlier this year. And but Alice Orgain, if I didn't mention her as being the author of that book I had just mentioned, she points out that Mrs. Eddy's True Mother Church is based upon these principles.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Well, Mrs. Eddy writes herself in Science and Health on page 562 that they're the stars in the crown of rejoicing, and they are lamps in the spiritual heavens, which she goes on to say, workings of the spiritual idea by healing sick and the sinning.
Thank you. Yeah, what Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health is essential to this study as well, starting on page 560. So, and I saw something I never had before, because she says on page 561, the woman in the Apocalypse symbolizes generic man, the spiritual idea of God. She illustrates the coincidence of God and man as the divine principle and divine idea. Now, who do we know to be this woman in the Apocalypse?
Mary Baker Eddy.
Mary Baker Eddy. And what I never noticed before is preceding this, she says the great miracle to human sense is divine love, and the grand necessity of existence is to gain the true idea of what constitutes the kingdom of heaven in man. This goal is never reached while we hate our neighbor or entertain a false estimate of anyone whom God has appointed to voice his word. Again, without a correct sense of its highest visible idea, we can never understand the divine principle. The marginal note says, true estimate of God's messenger. Now, it goes on about this. So to me, this was her veiled way of saying what to us?
She is the woman.
She is the woman. I never really noticed it before studying. I kind of thought, but it all just came together very clearly. This is what she's saying without saying, hey guys, it's me.
So pay attention.
And I would say to Jeremy to put up on our carousel, What Prospers Healing by Paul Smiley. Excuse me. Smiley. Paul Smiley. Excuse me, Paul. We had a few roundtables discussing that, and this is the point he brings out. And in order to have healing, and she says this too, how can you heal if you don't have the proper understanding of her? Carpenter says it too. These early workers, the ones that we abide by, they say it. They tell you this. You've got to know Mrs. Eddy. You've got to respect her and see what she's done. Read Carpenter's biographies, which she it will be explained how she demonstrated this science.
Every minute of every day.
Yes. So we can do likewise.
Now, let's get into it. Woman clothed with the sun. What is the sun?
Divine mind.
Spirit. Divine mind. Yes. I mean, Mrs. Eddy tells us what all this is. A woman clothed in the Spirit. Clothed in the Spirit. A spiritualized consciousness.
The light
and why was that? I'm sorry, go ahead.
The light of understanding.
Yeah.
Correct, exactly. This is the light that does not come from a material sun. It is the light of inspiration.
But it is the sun, brightest light. In my view, it's a direct reference to divinity itself. So when you're talking about spirit and divine mind, names for God, we're really talking about God here. The highest visible manifestation. This is Mrs. Eddy. She was clothed this way.
Kratzer said she is clothed with all known forms of light. And then specifically, the sun represents God, divine mind, the moon, the Christ consciousness, or spiritual creation, while the 12 stars represent all right ideas, specifically the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 apostles of the Lamb, or both. So all forms of light, talk about radiation. She was radiating God's presence and power. This enabled her to do this tremendous healing work that she did and to bring forth the divine idea known as Christian Science.
And it also says in Science and Health, the bottom of page 561, the spiritual idea is clad with the radiance of spiritual truth, which is the same thing.
And the moon was under her feet. What does that mean?
And the rest of that sentence says, and matter is put under her feet.
What does that mean to you?
That matter is under our feet, that I don't have to allow it to take over my life.
It means your life is not subject to any material so-called law. It means your life is totally spiritual. That matter is a mere shadow. It has no meaning. It has no usefulness. Zero. Nada.
Mrs. Eddy says matter can make no conditions on man, doesn't she? So remember that when it's trying to tell you it can.
Matter is an illusion.
It is.
Are you sure?
We have to learn it.
I'm trying to learn that.
Yeah, that's and Mrs. Eddy demonstrated it for us. Jesus demonstrated, and his apostles, the 12 crowns, the 12 stars, they demonstrated it for us, didn't they? So it's not like we have to reinvent it. It's been done for us. The 12 crowns demonstrated it.
And I have to say it's very interesting here because, well, some of you have visited, some of you haven't, but through all we've been through, quite a few people left church, but we've always had at least 12 people. And the 12 people have always been able to get the job done. And I find that significant.
The thing about this, under her feet, that's helped me, the very fact that she was above the moon. The moon was under her feet. She had risen above. And, teachings of Christian Science to rise above. For me, I'm just talking about mine. I've always done so much better when I've risen above instead of getting in the middle of things, fighting whatever it is on its own terms, but rather rise above it, get a clear view of things.
It's interesting what Mrs. Eddy says in Science and Health. She said, spirit and its formations are the only realities of being. Matter disappears under the microscope of spirit. That's interesting, the microscope of spirit.
Yeah.
Right, and what is the point of a microscope?
Well, you can see things.
You can see things that you otherwise cannot see. And what does the microscope refer to in this case?
Spiritual sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Florence. We see clearly with spiritual sense. We do not see clearly with material eyes, nose, ears.
So let's remember the spiritual warfare, some of the things that we need to do. And one of the first in this paragraph is to acknowledge Mrs. Eddy as the woman in the apocalypse. And to respect her as that, not worship, but respect and revere, I will say revere. Know of her life.
It's hard for me to see why that would be such a contested thing, actually, because acknowledging that doesn't take anything away from me. So,
I know.
You know, what's the point of... I read a lot about how Peele, in his biography, has really made sure to say that she was thinking personally when she would ever say that, and how, you know, all this is talking about generic man or whatever, not her. So, but I don't see what anyone gains from that. It only takes away.
The Peele books are so offensive to me. They so humanize her. And it is so offensive to me that they are the authorized biographies of her. It shows the tremendous deep sleep that has gone on in this organization, which all of our readings are going to bring out.
What they gain is the applause of the world, because the world does not want to acknowledge this. And so you're not popular if you acknowledge this. And as Eddy writes herself, that evil does this, takes her place, or from the view of people, I'm not saying this correctly, but that's the one thing it does the most, is try to keep people from understanding her.
Yes, yes.
And this is what, to me, represented the moon under her feet. The moon gets its light from reflecting it or stealing it or whatever you want to call it from the sun. And that's what matter error, what Linda was just saying, is what that wants to do, is it tries to steal what it can from the image of God to counterfeit it and make everybody believe the wrong thing.
Thank you. That's a good point. And
so that
well, and they would like to steal from her. The reason they don't want to acknowledge, why is the reason they don't want to acknowledge her?
Animal magnetism.
Yeah.
And also so that they won't take her word as the word of God, like we take Christ Jesus' sayings as the word of God. Hers should be the word of God also.
It should be. You're absolutely right. And when you know that, when you read Science and Health, like you're reading the Bible, the Word of God, it gives it this great power. If you read, oh, well, it was a nice lady writing a little book, well, you're not even going to be touched by it. Some of it, the refusal to acknowledge her, is male chauvinism. Wiley brings that out, and it's absolutely true. And today, you'd think, even in America, there's a lot of this male chauvinism going on. And Mrs. Eddy broke through it. And that's why, for any person, any woman really, to be called a Christian Scientist and who allow men to control her or boss her around, you're not being a Christian Scientist. Mrs. Evans was so clear. Mrs. Evans was a, fighter. There was no way she was having any man tell her what to do. No one was going to tell her what to do. She got her orders from God. We all must have that in us. And it can work the other way, too. I've seen many men who are being bossed around by women. So, no. But Mrs. Eddy was the example. And boy, did she have it in those days when she was here, the male chauvinism. How could some little woman know anything or do this?
Make a better decision than her lawyers.
Yes, or make a better decision than a lawyer's or a businessman. So she had to rise above it and put her foot on it. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's why they probably rejected her when she brought it to their churches. That's what she wanted to do, to bring the truth to them. But
absolutely,
yeah.
We're talking about a great wonder in heaven. And to whom was it a wonder?
Well, to everybody.
Well, yeah.
Starting with people who are receptive, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great, wonderful wonder to people who were receptive. It was a great threat to people who were not. No, this is a wonder to mortal belief. To wherever mankind's consciousness is, and of course there are, millions, billions of different levels of consciousness. And to each one, it's a great, great wonder. Because what is the battle? What are we talking about here? What's the battle between?
Battle between good and evil, and the battle is in consciousness.
Oh, it's a battle between spiritual truth and false material belief. Right? That's what Mrs. Eddy says on page 560, whatever.
But I think that business of probably chauvinism even applied to Jesus, because look how buried his doctrine has become. And Mrs. Eddy points out very bluntly at times how the true God spirit is motherhood, and that's what even Jesus represented, even though he was, the mortal view, he was a male. But it was that feminine quality, and they fought that with him also.
Well, in those days, women were not allowed in the synagogue, period. They weren't allowed to hold any kind of position in the church, period. It required a man, in order for anybody to listen to him, to pay attention to him, because it was only men who could go into the synagogue in the first place. We've come a long ways since then.
And boy, were they ever offended every time he spoke to a woman in public.
Right.
Exactly.
And even, hiding the writings, I guess there's a Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Someone was telling me recently, and I know it to be true, he was very close to her. She was the one who could see him at the tomb. She was very spiritually minded and very receptive to everything he said, more so than the men.
And of course, those who today who don't get it at all theorize that he had a sexual relationship with her. I mean, how off the mark could that possibly be?
That talk about the carnal human mind and having no spiritual sense at all. But that's probably because that type of mind, that's how they think. So that's how they think other people are. They see in others what they are themselves. You know, and Mrs. Eddy says, I was looking for it, but somewhere she says very modestly in her writings that John portrayed this coming of the Christ, or Science and Health, really, as a woman. She says, as a woman. And she says, he says it. I didn't say it. He says it. And so here I am, folks. But in other words, it's her modesty of not saying, well, she was a woman and I think this and I'm her. She was giving it to you by inference.
Implication.
Yes. And she says, persecution of all who have spoken something new and better of God has not only obscured the light of the ages, but has been fatal to the persecutors. Why? Because it has hid from them the true idea which has been presented. To misunderstand Paul was to be ignorant of the divine idea he taught. Ignorance of the divine idea betrays at once a greater ignorance of the divine principle of the idea, ignorance of truth and love. The understanding of truth and love, the principle which works out the ends of eternal good and destroys both faith in evil and the practice of evil, leads to the discernment of the divine idea. These are steps that must be taken. And if you don't, and if you think, and that's true, if you have people you know who are hateful toward Mrs. Eddy, not a good thing. Not a good thing for them. So do your best to straighten out that misconception. And I've seen it true when people, you know, it's one thing if people, okay, well, they don't believe in our church or whatever, they want to leave it, they don't think we're right. But if they try to attack us,
Because what are they attacking?
The divine
Christ, God.
idea.
Yeah,
They're attacking the Christ.
yeah. And how can you do that and survive?
So you
Not
go
what?
first.
Well, and we've seen it in our experience.
I've seen it just in the time I've been here.
and then they call it malpractice. Well, it's not malpractice. No one hears. We couldn't be a malpractitioner. You can't heal and do this work if you're a malpractitioner. They're doing it to themselves, and it's dangerous. Do mine anointed no harm. And as long as we are doing as God bid us to, and that's a big but, then we come under His protection.
So just to go along with what Mary started saying, anyone who would violently oppose Christian Science, Mrs. Eddy, anyone in the church that is a good healer, anyone who would violently oppose that, it shows that they are violently opposed to what God is requiring of them. They don't want to live a Christ-like life. They don't want to give up the human mind. So as we climb up the hill ourselves and they try to drag us down, we have to let them go. We have to let them have whatever experience they need in order for them to get out of the mental rut that they are in.
Like the stranger in the allegory.
Exactly.
I just wanted to read on page 58 of the Tomlinson book. He gives the 7 stages from the discernment of Christian Science to its manifestation. But number 4, which is about this chapter, is woman's revelation brings forth Christian Science, and error vainly resists it. And then number 5 is resistance to science brings the plague of physical sense. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's the want and woe, sin, sickness, death. Those are the plagues that become visible in this warfare as the material beliefs have to be broken down. They have to be broken down. You can't fix wrong material beliefs. You can't fix matter.
That's what the human mind wants to do. You want to try to fix it, put it together, placate it, live with it, compromise with it. And it does not work. I know, because I've tried it. You have to be so clear about this science in your own thought. If you have someone who actively is opposing you in your home, it's time to take a stand. And if you follow what we're talking about, the spiritual warfare, you can. You can do it. But if you don't, and you bow down to the demands, then you
lose your ability to heal.
You do.
You compromise your own position.
But also on top of that, even if you're resisting it, but not doing it in a spiritual sense, it doesn't work. And
no, you can't resist it humanly.
Exactly.
You can't fight it on its own terms, as Bruce mentioned earlier. You have to rise above it.
I proved that one.
Put your heel on its neck.
And this is why, we were taught this many years ago. Any of you, if you become reader or you take some stance in the church, certainly a practitioner, if there is error lurking in your home, it will rise up and it will oppose. And this is your time to prove its nothingness, because it is nothing unless you believe it to be something and are afraid of it and worship it. But it begins, the men become separated from the boys at this point. We've called it at times the ring of fire. And I know when I used to hear about this, I said, good God, get me out of this place.
but you can't run from it.
You can't. You cannot run from it.
I mean, you can run, but you can't hide.
Yeah.
Well, and what Mary is describing, everybody here in Plainfield who is still with this church has had this experience. We're not talking about anything theoretical here.
Yeah.
Or we're not talking about anything that all of us here haven't already had to do. We've had to leave family members behind. We've had to leave friends, so-called, behind in this to do this work. And it has been the greatest blessing, not only for us, but it's been the greatest blessing for them. The human mind needs a shock. Whatever that shock has to be, it needs a shock. So let it be shocked. It will be the greatest benefit to whoever that person is that that is being shocked. And it'll bless a lot of other people who observe it.
But you can never do it because we're saying it has to come from your own heart. You have to feel it yourself. You have to feel it. And as you grow on this path, you will begin to feel it. You can't help but feel it because you'll begin to see. It is, as Jeremy said, the allegory. You're walking up the path, and you've got to. But this is part of your progress. This is part of the spiritual warfare. We'll get into some more of this, too, but Mrs. Eddy talks about what it is that really heals, what it is that is important. And so one of it is acknowledging, Mrs. Eddy, absolutely. And also we talked about having the spiritual sense, the microscope of spirit. So you can see correctly, so you get where vision becomes clear and you're not confused by what mortal mind beliefs are trying to tell you. It is a light. It's a light of understanding that comes over you as you progress. And all these things just begin to happen to you. And the way becomes clearer. Jeremy?
I just wanted to say about, making a stand and leaving people behind. It's not a mean thing because they know where we are. And if they came back the right way, it's not like we'd be like, I don't want to see you guys. If they came to the church and did the right thing, you'd be happy to see them. So.
Oh, and Mrs. Evans used to say this all the time. People that she had to kind of separate herself from for this reason, to enable her to continue to do what God required her to do. She said, I love them. I love them all. I can't spend a lot of time with them now, but if they want to see me, they can come to church, and that's where they will find me.
I feel some of them leave anyway. They leave you alone. So that's it.
Yeah. That's true. And when they're ready, they will come back.
And this is what I was looking for. It's in verses in Revelation where John says, and they overcame him, and that means the dragon, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. So what is the blood of the Lamb?
Jeremy wrote this a long time ago from a watch. Blood is thought, and your blood is pure thought, a health-giving, life-giving thought, and nothing impure can enter into that thought. It is perfectly pure. So that's the blood of Lamb to me, and it's an idea of life.
And that's a quote from Mrs. Eddy.
Okay, and it's on page 51. And then Bicknell Young, page 111, blood is the idea of life. The claim that blood is a thing is a false claim. Life is the only thing. The idea, then, is that life is and is perfect.
And what's the Lamb?
Christ.
Right.
Yes, Christ. So it's certainly his blood, what he sacrificed for us. But if you pursue this, sometimes in purity, in your purity and your innocence, error would attack you. So it's the suffering that you go through sometimes for doing nothing wrong, but just obeying God the best you know how. And then, by the word of their testimony, what's this? These are three things how to overcome that red dragon, okay? So it's very important. What's the word of your testimony?
Truth.
Yes. We should be so full of testimonies, praising God at our Wednesday meetings, and thank God we do. We have good testimonies, people giving them. It should be welling up in our hearts that it's going to shut this red dragon up. How can it speak when you're singing hymns and praising God? How can it speak in your own head when you're singing hymns and praising God and giving testimony for all God has done to? It can't. It shuts it up. Shuts it down.
It's the evidence of the truth, so what is it going to do?
Yes, and you all know error tries to shut that up. Error will try to get you to shut up. Don't give your testimony. Don't praise God. Don't tell somebody how you were healed.
The Old Testament is full of it. Teach it to your children. Wear it on your forehead, lest ye forget.
Absolutely. And then the last one, which is really what we were talking about before, and they love not their lives unto death. What does that mean?
You're willing to give up your personal life and your human destiny to do this.
Thank you very much. A good, perfect answer. Including anyone that would attack you for doing this. Whatever it takes, you're willing to do. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it, but you have to be willing to do it. These are tough words, but how else do you think this is going to be achieved? By sitting in our armchair and dozing?
Well, it's an army we are joining, so we must be toughened.
We are. And we're not being asked to go to the battlefront where there are bombs exploding. Although if we don't do this work, that's exactly what might happen. So let's take it in this mental realm here. Let's be willing. We're not being asked more than what we can do. And although it seems hard, maybe when you're going through it, as Gary said, the results are tremendous. And if you don't do it, you think you're taking a shortcut or it's an easier way. It is not an easier way. I'm telling you right now, because what's going to meet you down that road is you avoid, and say peace, 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 peace. When there is no peace, waiting for you, it'll explode. And this isn't my opinion. It's
the truth.
It's the truth. So why not eat it now?
So you're saying the bombs explode in our consciousness?
Yeah, but don't they? They do.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
If we don't face it and handle it in our consciousness, they will explode in our nation.
And what our children, what future generations are going to have to deal with is beyond.
It's up to us, folks.
Yeah. We are in this period now. We have a period where we can change things by this mental work. And these early workers, I would suggest all of you read Christian Science, Its Clear, Correct Teaching, and Complete Writings by Eustace. But he does a whole section on the beast of Revelation and also the false prophet. And he does not mince words. He does not mince words about government either and what's going on. You know, at one time, I mean, even Mrs. Evans, she never took health insurance. Any government handout she would refuse because she felt it would be interfering with her direct line with the Father. Eustace goes into this. Actually, Kratzer does in the next chapter. Organization that takes over and starts controlling everything and giving everything, it becomes a false god, one of the beasts.
And now we have a huge false god on our hands in
called
this
government.
country.
But the god of materia medica needs to be exposed so people will know this is not something you worship first.
Yes.
There's an alternative that has been given in this country by Mrs. Eddy how many years ago. People need to know that so they can start relying on that some.
Thank you. Yes. Materia Medica, our huge government, our churches that have just resulted in huge organizations, including the Christian Science.
The BOD.
The BOD. It's not Christian Science, something else. All of these control. Read the next chapter in the Kratzer. So, and once you see this, everything begins to make sense, and you know what's going on in our country, how to think about it, and how to handle it. But when you don't know it, you're depressed, and you're just, everything's all fuzzy and murky and not clear.
You become easily influenced by the propaganda that is rampant. Great Red Dragon is really effective.
It's amazing that nobody takes up how much advertising goes on. I never hear it in anyway.
No, you're right. And it's gotten so bad. I mean, it used to be you'd have an Ipana toothpaste ad, and it was cute, the Bucky Beaver or whatever. But now it's all this stuff on
yes.
And they'd have one ad before, between intermissions, but now there's like 4 or 5 different things being
bombarded with it.
And that's why I go back to the third point, the third requirement. Love not their life unto the death. What do we have today? We have a society in which everybody does love their life. They do want to buy all this crap that they don't need because they want to, right? They want to. They worship their body. They love themselves unto the death.
The meat
and
generation.
That is exactly why there's so much advertising, because people will buy the darn products. If people would stop loving their life unto the death, if they would stop buying the products they don't need, if they would stop catering to their human wants and desires, well, then the advertising would go away.
Because there'd be no one buying this stuff.
See, so all of this is the effect of people being in the human mind and catering to the wrong God.
Catering to their senses and not developing their spiritual sense, which will lead them aright.
The advertising and the drug industry has gotten so huge that it's as if the time has come for people to turn to Christian Science.
Yes, yes. And you know, this is in this chapter 12, too, that things get so bad that they do themselves in. And that's what's happening. We talked last week about mesmerism. I was quoting someone, that Norwegian prophet. Anyway, they said mesmerism either has to run itself out to the end or it has to be shocked out of it. But if it runs out to the end, people will say, what the heck? And it already is. You know, I heard this week that 200 to 300 people a day die of overdoses in our country. The man was saying that that would be as if a jumbo plane crashes every day. Now, if that were happening, like Mike said last week about the lettuce, something would be done about it. You know, we got lettuce that's not right, it's taken off the shelves. But this is the silent killer that's going on. And it's sad. He was saying there are more jobs in our country, but people can't get the jobs because they're on drugs. But you see, we're waking up to the horror of this, the horror of everybody popping pills. People are waking up, and this Kratzer brings that out. And Mrs. Eddy does too. What does she say? The extreme, where it's shock, indignation. Good God, what's going on here? Do I really want to pop a pill or have all my kids pop pills when they're only 5 years old?
Can you imagine?
That's what's being taught.
Can you imagine what our nation would be like if the board of directors had obeyed the estoppel clauses? If they had not built a huge human organization which now attracts people with ambition who have no concept of what Christian Science is? Can you imagine what life would be like if Christian Science had been respected by the board of directors? If Mrs. Eddy's demands had been obeyed, because they weren't hers, they were God's.
There'd probably be a lot more Christian Scientists across the country.
She had a wonderful relationship.
Working ones.
Yeah, she had a wonderful relationship with the press.
I have to jump in here, sorry, as moderator. I'm going to say something, and thank you for saying that, Gary, because the biggest thing that I found in these rather obscure places that I was studying Revelation 12 on is how much this Revelation 12 is not only Science and Health, but the manual. And the disobedience, what they pulled off with the manual, is what led everything astray. Because the manual is in Revelation 12, and it's the law that we are supposed to be. It's the government, the healing of the nations. It's what we're supposed to be living under, which has been said here before.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Absolutely.
That's great. So I wanted to mention that in Kratzer, because we're using that today, the beginning has the Declaration of Independence, so hopefully everybody's read through that. But in there, it says here from Science and Health, there is no ecclesiastical monopoly. So you'll also find this on the Plainfield Church website. So if you want to read it there, but Science and Health, page 141, line 17. And just a thought on the Boston Church ignoring the estoppels. There actually was an article about this written 1955 in the Journal. And this, there is no ecclesiastical monopoly. It was described as the two pastors. So that's how they achieve that ecclesiastical monopoly is the Bible and the Science and Health are our pastors. Saying nothing about the church organization.
But see, this is a weird thing that it's such a subtle thing, and I haven't even gotten to that page. I'm studying the 88th and the 89th edition together, and if it hadn't been in the index comparison, I would have never known it, because on page 120, what they did was they declared that in the 88th, the order of service was for the Mother Church, and in the 89th, they added for branch churches. So what they very subtly did was they totally diverged everybody from being at one with God themselves to them getting control of it, because I can't quite quote it directly, but Mrs. Eddy says that the prosperity of the church depends upon the weekly lesson. And by diverting and taking over the weekly lesson completely and not letting the branch churches do what they're supposed to be doing, or what she allowed them to do, they have totally hijacked the whole movement.
You're right. Thank you, Mike.
Right. And so we have a large human organization wasting millions and millions of dollars doing things that are totally useless or even or worse, and have nothing to do with Christian Science. All in the name of Christian Science. Is there any wonder today why the press is, why people have no concept, never heard of Christian Science? Is there any wonder why the churches are empty? The human mind is a killer. Period. Don't feed it. Don't cater to it. Destroy it with the truth, of course. Rise above it. Put your foot on its neck. The moon under her feet.
This in Kratzer goes back to what we were talking about before. The big government, the materia medica, the educational system. Kratzer says, talking about the dragon, verse 4, the dragon suggests to us an animal of the crocodile or alligator order. The tail of such animals is a seat of great power and is their chief fighting weapon, because it talks about him taking his tail. So the power of the dragon to seduce men is represented as located in his tail. The dragon is, of course, the whole body of the false belief, general mortal mind acting as a unit, the devil and Satan, as John himself declares in verse 9 of this chapter. The stars of heaven are those who have attained repute for learning and wisdom and have been regarded as leading light or authorities among men. And it's referring to this verse, which I probably should have read first. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So, the symbol may connote both atheistic or materialistic scientists and philosophers, and still others who are professors of Christianity. Though all these may be for a time sincere in their beliefs and teaching, the devil is represented as deceiving and seducing a large part of them, drawing them into the service of their lower natures, and thus casting them to earth, that is, into materiality, sensuality, and wickedness. The devil will continue to do this during the period of apparent satanic ascendancy. That also includes, of course, the news media. It appealed to their lower natures, even though they might have started out as something good. And now it controls them. And that's what we see. And that's what we were talking about, these different institutions. And what motivates them? Sometimes greed, sensuality. I mean, you hear about all these morality issues going on.
Pedophiles in the Catholic Church,
sex trade, pornography, all kinds of things that come in appealing to the lower levels, and it throws them to the earth.
Outright wickedness, too.
Yes.
Alice Orgain had a very funny thing that I never had seen before. She hyphenated dragon to drag on, and then said of old theology, which I think sums it up. I mean, now the CSBOD is old theology because they're dragging down the whole Christian Science movement that Mrs. Eddy created.
Now, the bright side of this all is the remnant, and this is why it's in our Liberator, and it talks amongst this talks about the remnant. The remnant will see, the remnant will work. It speaks about, again, and I'm going to have Gary end it on this, at Mary's time, when the Christ was brought forth, the darkest period, the Roman Empire, all of this stuff was going on and worse, but they kept praying, they kept working. They were a group of dedicated metaphysical workers, and they raised the consciousness. Because you see, by keeping this right thought, the human mind will, and it says in the Crafter, it'll suddenly say, my God, what's going on here? And it is. It's beginning to waken. This is awful. This isn't what we want. This isn't the direction we want to go in. But you see, that's done by the spiritualization of thought. And we are holding that, the true concept, what is true, what is right, in our thought, in our prayers, in our watches. And we don't give up on it. This is what they did, and this is what was brought forth, the Christ was brought forth. And Kratzer brings out, it couldn't have come unless the thought had been somewhat uplifted. I mean, as it was, very beginning, they tried to kill the baby Jesus, didn't they? They were always trying to kill him. But because the thought was uplifted, at least to some degree, they couldn't. And this is true with our work, too. So no matter what this dragon, suppositional dragon, tries to do, as our thought keeps uplifting, we will purify, elevate, and negate anything that is tried to be done. Now, in Martha Wilcox, after she talks about Mary and the group of metaphysical thinkers, and we put that in the Liberator. We've had it often because it's my most favorite thing in the world, one of them, because I can relate to it, and you all should. So it's summarized by these points, which Gary will read.
Let us review some of the vital points of this lesson. First, the divine idea or spiritual fact held persistently within the mentality will externalize itself in outward and visible forms. Second, the divine idea, when correctly understood as the mighty God or as active, powerful, conscious good, holds within itself the power to demonstrate itself. Third, things do not merely happen. There is a divine basis for every human thing, circumstance, condition, and event. Fourth, it is spiritual law, active in human consciousness, that causes spiritual facts to become humanly and materially visible to mankind. Fifth, the divine idea or Savior will come to our human consciousness in concrete visible demonstration only when our consciousness is prepared and ready, both mentally and spiritually. Period.
So there you have it. And if God be for us, who can be against us? We just have to work this. Can't sleep. So as we uphold the truth in our thought, as we consistently keep working, all good is coming down the pike. As was said in the very beginning, we cheerfully await what?
Certainty of perfection.
Ultimate
The
perfection.
certainty of ultimate perfection. So thank you, Mike.
And Mike, do you want to add any more, or does anyone else want to add any more?
Yes, my question is, do we have time for verses 2 through 16 still? I mean, 17? Just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
We could talk about this for hours and not even maybe touch the subject.
Well, we did. It's
may
beautiful.
I add something?
Certainly.
in accordance with Revelation 12, verse 6, in Revelation Interpreted on pages 254 and 255, it gives an excellent explanation and authority for Mary Baker Eddy's bringing forth of Christian Science. It is, and it's come from an independent source, not a Christian Scientist. It came from Reverend Kratzer has it in there, but it's from the Self-Interpreting Bible, and it's just excellent.
Well, everybody should read it, and maybe we can maybe we can continue this some
Mike,
other time.
Mike, I'm grateful Mike wanted to take on Revelation, and it's not an easy thing to take on, so we certainly can go on with this discussion. But I would suggest, you read Kratzer, you read Eustace, what he says about the false prophet and the beast, and Tomlinson, and of course Mrs. Eddy, who's the ultimate authority. Anybody else?
Yeah, so maybe we can continue this some other time.
Yeah, we'll just schedule Mike once a month.
A revelation guy.
I've been very grateful for this.
Yes. Well, and also, as you live it, you can't understand it if you're not living it. It sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. But as you live it, you begin to understand it. You know, we had that discussion about the churches. That's in Revelation. And you begin to see these things. You begin to understand what's really going on. Everything becomes clear. But if you're not living it, you're just living your own selfish life somewhere, it doesn't make any sense. You're not going to get it. You don't probably even want to get it. Pardon me?
Practice makes perfect.
That's
it. Thought has to be open.
Yep.
But I want to say that this is why these Bible studies and the round tables are so important, because the gobbledygook also comes from where they went and perverted what Mrs. Eddy left us. That 88th to 89th manual is the perfect example, because this is the first time I've ever understood anything in the manual, because it never made sense until I realized that was a forged, 89th is a forged manual.
Yeah, and isn't that liberating? See, this is unwinding our snarls when we learn these things. All the things that have confused us and perplexed us, suddenly, oh yeah, I get it now. And then not only do you get it, your life begins to get better in every way. Healing comes. You're uplifted. Your thought is spiritualized. So thank you. And before we close, I think I'd like to mention one thing. Thomas has been doing a wonderful job getting books for our church.
The library.
For our library, yes. Hard to find books. And I think what I would like to have, if any of you, because he's been taking it out of his pocket to buy books, and he's very careful to get things at a good price, but he watches the market, as we say. He watches the internet. But if anyone would like to contribute directly to that, for buying books for our library, so they do not disappear from the face of the earth, we will have a little separate fund, Bruce. You can designate, you're giving whatever.
The library fund.
The library fund. And Thomas, do you want to say anything? Still here?
Sure. So, there are a lot of really good books out there that are, frankly, outrageous prices, and that's okay if people want to pay for that. But I just bought a book, a biography I'd never heard of before, but it was only $13, and elsewhere you could buy it for $75, I also bought the 14th edition, Volume 1. If you look at some of the Science and Health, some of them go for hundreds of dollars, So I bought this for $51, an original, not a reprint, So they're out there. Linda can tell you that we looked at a Science and Health, I think, original from 1908, $25, because someone found it in the attic. Didn't know what to do with it, so they put it on eBay. So it's an interesting thing, and I think the library at the Plainfield Church, I know Linda knows a lot more about this than I do, but there is so much material that's there at the church already. So it's very wonderful. It's very precious. And I'm learning a lot through this whole process about books I never heard of before.
Someone suggested that we put a list together of a wish list, and that will be coming out soon, too, just in case people even have books around that they want to donate. So
yeah.
That'll be coming out soon, too.
Maybe eventually we will get where we can digitalize some of them and put them on the internet so everyone can look at them. And then we will have them in 2 places. But what we're thinking of, we're preserving this Christian Science literature for prosperity because we don't know what will happen. And if we can get as much and as many of these things, and God will provide it. I mean, God provided Thomas to think of doing this, and Linda too, because the rest of us are busy with other things. But if they feel so impelled to do this, there is a darn good reason. I was thinking about it last night. There's a darn good reason why. It didn't just happen. They were motivated to do it. The other wonderful thing that's just happened is that we heard from a website in Pakistan. Jeremy, tell us about it.
Oh yeah, they offered to translate our videos, actually overdub them in Punjabi and Urdu. So we're talking to them now. But
that means we'll reach millions of people in that language. We had once had someone who translated our lesson in Urdu, but we are not sure what happened to him. This is a sweet, looks like a very sweet Christian church in Pakistan who came to us offering this. So God is working his purpose out in this church as long as we humbly kneel before him and obey him and keep our eyes and ears open when he would have us do. So thank you all.
Thank you again, Mike. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.